It's a spellcasting monk, guys. What more do you want? Have you just watched Avatar: The Last Airbender for the 14th time and now want to play a character just like that in your D&D campaign? Or maybe you want to find a character that feels kind of like the Jedi Knights from Star Wars, having the combat prowess while also being able to wield elemental powers beyond your understanding in the powers of the Force. Or maybe you just want to play a monk and you want it to throw spells at people, because what's better than a monk that can fly or cast fireball, right? Well, if you're any of those things, or if you're not, you've probably been looking online about the Way of the Four Elements, and you probably have come across quite a lot of bad press about the subclass and how it's weak and how it's too resource heavy, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you're still interested in the class and want to have something that's a bit more nuanced, a bit more balanced, then this is the video for you. Welcome to Don't Believe the Hype, talking today all about the Way of the Four Elements.
Dungeons and Motherfucking Dragons!
So this video was voted for by our subscribers on our Discord channel. So our subscribers to Twitch get access to the subscriber channel on our official Discord on Slice and Dice. And anyway, our subscribers on there voted out of an array of subclasses and so on. And the Way of the Four Elements won out. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about the Way of the Four Elements. I'm going to kind of break this down into three sections. The first being an outline kind of the class and its features. Then a second being more of the criticism. And then finally, thirdly, kind of ways of improving it and a kind of, I guess, a summary of the subclass. So, as I said, to kick things off, let's delve into the features of the Way of the Four Elements. So at level 3, when you choose your subclass and you choose the Way of the Four Elements, you'll notice that it's not really got a lot of features as such. In fact, instead of features, you get to choose new disciplines, elemental disciplines, or spells, as most of them are otherwise known as. But some are unique only to the Way of the Four Elements and are really, really cool. And I think a lot of times that is overlooked by min-maxers and munchkin-type players who normally will enter stuff into online forums about the class. So the first thing you get, as it says in the player's handbook, is Disciple of the Elements. When you choose this tradition at 3rd level, you learn magical disciplines that harness the power of the four elements. A discipline requires you to spend key points each time you use it. All except one, but they don't say that there. You know the elemental discipline and one other the elemental attunement discipline and one other elemental discipline of your choice, which are detailed in the elemental disciplines section below. You learn one additional elemental discipline of your choice at 6th, 11th, and 17th level. Whenever you learn a new elemental discipline, you can also replace one elemental discipline that you already know with a different discipline. So you get some versatility as you go up the levels because you'll be able to change out your spells. I will get more onto that actually, because it's not quite as flexible as maybe you'd want it to be, but we'll come back to that. So it also notes that some elemental disciplines allow you to cast spells. Now, if you want to be pernickety with the rules, this is a very important distinction. Not all of the elemental disciplines are in fact spells. Some of them are unique, as I said, to the Way of the Four Elements, and so whilst being elemental disciplines, technically aren't spells. So if there's something that, for instance, there's a non-magic force field, something like that, or another effect that would then perhaps mitigate spell effects, then those disciplines would still technically be able to be used as they're not spells. They're more using elemental forces to your will. Anyway, so I think without any further ado, we should probably dive straight in to some of the elemental disciplines. Note that as you go up your levels as well, you'll be able to upgrade some of your disciplines to make them more powerful. In fact, I think that happens with most of them. And sometimes it can be beneficial doing so, but a lot of the time I've come more and more to the belief that actually the dice themselves, how many dice you get to roll for damage is useful, but perhaps not as useful as the extra effects that you get from these elemental disciplines. Anyway, that will probably more become clear when we jump in to the elemental disciplines, which we're going to do right now. So, I'll go through these kind of in an order as you would progress up the levels, just to get you an idea of what you can get at which level. So, you have to take elemental attunement at 3rd level, and a lot of online discussions of the Way of the Four Elements in forums and so on tell you that when you go up to level 6, you should probably swap the elemental attunement for another discipline. It can be a valid argument because you're very limited on the amount of disciplines you can take. By 6th level, you can only have 3. However, I would advise caution against doing that, particularly at lower levels, because when you do that, then you can't use any of your elemental disciplines without also spending key points. Another criticism is that the Way of the Four Elements is quite resource heavy, and you'll use your key points very quickly. I think there may be some merit to this, but I think I'll get more onto that criticism later on, and my thoughts on it, because I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, perhaps maybe being a bit overblown to get people to read articles, for instance. I would say at lower levels you probably want to keep a hold of elemental attunement because it's the only one that you can use without spending key points. It's essentially like a cantrip. It's got some similarities to prestidigitation, very hard to say quickly, but it's got more of an elemental feel to it. So it's most of a prestidigitation spell with a couple of little ribbons attached to it, which is very useful. And actually, I think for utility's sake, elemental attunement can be very useful to you for a number of situations, whereas the rest of the disciplines, there are going to be specific times when you can use them and specific times when it's not appropriate. And equally, it's going to cost you key points each time you do it. Yes, you get your key points back on a short rest. However, there's going to be more often than not at lower levels you're going to be wanting to save those key points for when you really need them. So elemental attunement is a nice way of keeping your Four Elements monk feeling like an elemental monk and being able to do stuff without having to take a rest every couple of minutes. So I would say at lower level you want to keep a hold of it, and you'll be surprised about the versatility of using it. Being able to instantly light or snuff a candle, a torch, or a small campfire, it's going to have a number of uses. You could apply that not only to those specified there. You could set light to, depending on your DM, of course. You could set fire to other smaller things like leaves. It could be maybe webbing. In one game I played, we placed, I think it was a bit of wood was underneath some webbing, and then you set that piece of wood on fire, therefore the webbing caught fire. Boom, very useful, and only, no cost to you whatsoever for your Four Elements monk character. So that's elemental attunement. In addition, as I said, like prestidigitation, you can create a harmless instantaneous sensory effect, although in this case it's related to air, earth, fire, or water, just to give it that elemental feel. You can also chill or warm up to a pound of non-living material for up to 1 hour, just like prestidigitation. You can also cause earth, fire, water, or mist that can fit within a 1-foot cube to shape itself into a crude form you designate for 1 minute. So especially if you're leaning into the RP, I think elemental attunement is going to be a very useful one, and to keep your elemental monk feeling like this conduit for elemental power. So, also at 3rd level, you'll have to choose one other discipline. Here are the ones that you can choose from in alphabetical order. First of all, Fangs of the Fire Snake. Now this one sounds really cool. When you use the attack action on your turn, you can spend 1 key point to cause your tendrils of flame to reach out from your fists and feet. Your reach with your unarmed strikes increases by 10 feet for that action, making your reach 15 feet. As well as the rest of your for that action, as well as the rest of your turn, forgive me. A hit with such an attack deals fire damage instead of bludgeoning damage, and if you spend 1 key point additionally when the attack hits, it also deals an extra 1d10 fire damage. Okay, so on the one hand, sounds great. You not only are you getting reach, which is one thing that monks really lack. They're quite a melee oriented class, especially with martial arts and so on. However, they're also they're not people who really want to be in the fray very long, and so a lot of the time you're probably going to be wanting to kind of use hit and run tactics, meaning you're going to have to use bonus actions to disengage with your key points, or other ways of getting out of combat. Feats like mobile, for instance, are really useful for monks because you can pound something and then get out of there without incurring any opportunity attacks. So you're kind of opportunistic in that sense. With Fangs of the Fire Snake, you can then engage somebody without getting into melee contact and therefore not getting an attack of opportunity when you then bug out. So in that sense, really useful. Also, turning your bludgeoning damage into fire damage is going to be really useful against certain opponents, ones who are obviously vulnerable to fire damage, and equally those who are resistant to bludgeoning damage. If you can then turn it into fire damage, that's going to negate that, and hopefully they won't have a resistance to fire damage as well. So it's a kind of a way of changing up your unarmed strikes to make them more useful to you. So for 1 key point at level 3, that means you can you'll get 1 attack with the fire damage, possibly an extra one if you use your bonus action to do an unarmed strike, so you therefore double your amount of attacks. That's 2 attacks, and you can get away without having to use any bonus actions because you're not engaged in melee. So it can be useful for 1 key point, especially at 3rd level. I would suggest not spending the extra key points to do a d10 of fire damage unless there's a really good reason to do that. Yes, it would be great for that kind of one-off Naruto style or other animated series, maybe a Captain Falcon kind of Falcon Punch, go in there and boom, fire goes off, or Street Fighter, something like that. That's cool, but you then can't do anything because you then used up all your key points, because at 3rd level, 3 key points per short rest, not a lot, meaning you're going to have to make some difficult decisions on that one. Anyway, that is Fangs of the Fire Snake. Next, Fist of Four Thunders. You can spend 2 key points to cast Thunderwave. Now, Thunderwave obviously is a spell from the player's handbook. It's a useful area of effect, and one of only a few that you get to use, but certainly it's useful to you as a monk, as I said before, being more of a melee combatant. If you can get a bunch of enemies kind of facing up against you that fits within your 15-foot cube, fantastic. Lay on that thunder wave and watch them all tremble as they all take thunder damage and possibly get pushed away from you. If they get pushed away, fantastic, because that means, again, you can get out of there without having to spend a bonus action on disengaging. Hooray. So, again, a very useful spell. However, bear in mind, 3rd level, 3 key points. You can do that once per short rest. You can do... So, Fist of the Four Thunders, you're only going to get once per short rest, and then you have 1 key point left to use one of your other martial arts or other monk abilities. So quite heavy at 3rd level, but will be useful higher up the levels. Next we have Fist of Unbroken Air. Like Fangs of the Fire Snake, this is not a spell, it's an elemental discipline specifically for the 4 elements monk. If you've played a spellcaster before and are playing a elemental monk for the first time, I would strongly consider using the specific elemental disciplines that are just for the Way of the 4 Elements, because you're not going to see them anywhere else in the game. Fist of Unbroken Air, I think, quite possibly is one of the best, in my opinion, for combat. Just like with Fangs of the Fire Snake and Fist of Four Thunders, less so. It's a way of being able to engage an enemy without having to get within melee range. That's one of the real strengths of the 4 elements subclass, which I think is missed quite a lot, is that it's one of the main monk subclasses that gives you real ranged options and diversity of ranged options. Yes, with the release of Xanathar's Guide, we had the Way of the Sun Soul, which gives you a ranged attack that's it's kind of more like a Hadouken kind of shooting light from your hands, and also you get burning hands, I think, later on as well, and that sort of thing. That's great. However, that's the only one you get. Whereas with the 4 elements monk, as you can see already, you've got 3 different ranged options already. So Fist of Unbroken Air, this is unlike Fist of Four Thunders. This is for a single opponent. It's not an area effect, but it does some really cool stuff. So, as it says in the text, you can create a blast of compressed air that strikes like a mighty fist. Yes, you could reskin this as a fart if you really wanted to. I've seen XP to level 3. I've seen you. I know. hilarious. But anyway, without reskinning it, so yeah, imagine a powerful fist made of air that appears from your strike and strikes out at an enemy of your choice. You must choose a creature within 30 feet of you, and you have to spend 2 key points, notably, to use this feature. So you choose that creature within 30 feet of you, spend 2 key points. That creature must then make a strength saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 3d10 bludgeoning damage, plus an extra 1d10 bludgeoning damage for each additional key point you spend. And you can push the creature up to 20 feet away from you and knock it prone. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage and you don't push it or knock it prone. So even if you do half damage, 3d10 bludgeoning damage halved still could be, I mean, it's going to be a minimum of 1 if you roll 3 ones. However, that's unlikely to happen, but 3d10 is still a significant amount of damage with 1 hit. And plus, if you're successful, you are pushing them 20 feet away and knocking them prone. That's so 1, getting it out of your reach so that they can no longer make opportunity attacks against you. Great. Knocking them prone means they're going to have to use half their movements on their turn to then stand up. Or alternatively, if you have other allies who are going to be around the creature before they get up, you've then instantly given them advantage and they're going to hail you as a team player and a hero. So definitely useful in that regard. I'd also add to that under the casting elemental spells bit. It says once you reach 5th level in this class, you can spend additional key points to increase the level of an elemental discipline spell that you cast, provided that the spell has an enhanced effect at a higher level, as Burning Hands does. The spell's level increases by 1 for each additional key point you spend. So the important word there is it says elemental discipline spell. As we know earlier on in the description of Disciple of the Elements, in casting elemental spells, the first sentence says, some elemental disciplines allow you to cast spells. If they had said all elemental disciplines allow you to cast spells, that would apply to all of the elemental disciplines. But as it distinguishes some, that means that the ones that are specific to the class, Fangs of the Fire Snake, Fist of Unbroken Air, Water Whip, I was going to say Shape the Flowing River, but I don't think that one applies. But the other 3 all apply to that. All don't apply as spells. They're not spells. They're elemental disciplines. So I think even at 3rd level, if you wanted to really nova your Fist of Unbroken Air, you could spend all 3 key points. So you could do an extra d10 of damage. So you do 4d10 bludgeoning damage. Again, at level 3, I would advise don't do that, because then you're completely out of key points until you short rest. And equally, I think when you use that spell, whilst the damage is good, there's going to be other combatants who can probably do more damage than you in one round. And actually, why you want to use that is more for the utility effects. Being able to, the control of the battlefield, should I say, being able to push an enemy away and knock them prone is pretty darn powerful. Final notes on Fist of Unbroken Air and why it's amazing. It also doesn't specify anything to do with size. So most spells and other effects that, such as grappling, shoving, they specify the size of the creature is relevant to whether you're going to be successful on those spell attempts and so on. A lot of them specify it has to be a huge creature or smaller, or a large creature or smaller. Fist of Unbroken Air doesn't specify size. So if for some reason you're going up against a gargantuan creature, could well happen at higher levels, and you use Fist of Unbroken Air, it doesn't matter about its size, you'll still be able to push it 20 feet away from you and knock it prone, unless that creature is immune to prone. But if it's not, that's pretty powerful. Imagine being able to knock a dragon prone whilst in the sky and watching it tumble to the ground thanks to your elemental monk. That's pretty cool, right? But yes, Fist of Unbroken Air, I think, could be very useful to you. Perhaps you might want to wait till 6th level before taking that. Next up, Rush of the Gale's Spirits. You can spend 2 key points to cast Gust of Wind. This is the only 2nd level spell that you can access at 3rd level in the Elemental Monk subclass. So, it's also the only one that you'll notice that spells, for the most part, in the elemental disciplines, the cost to use them in key points is basically the level of spell it is plus 1. Not so with Rush of the Gale Spirits. 2 key points for a second level spell. That's pretty useful. It's worth bearing in mind that this spell is not going to be it's not a damage dealing spell. It's very much a control spell. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best one, but there will be some niche uses for it where it's going to prove a real difference to you, especially in narrow corridors. So just to remind you, Gust of Wind is a second level spell where while you concentrate on it for up to a minute, you basically can blast air from you in a 10-foot, I think it's a 60-foot long by 10 feet line. But basically, if the creatures within that line fail on a strength saving throw, they get pushed 15 feet back. Which is really useful because also whilst they're within the corridor of that spell, they also have to spend 2 feet of movement for every foot they want to move towards you in that terrain. It also disperses gas or vapor, extinguishes candles, torches, and similar unprotected flames in the area. It causes protected flames, such as those of lanterns, to dance wildly and has a 50% chance to extinguish them. Also, as a bonus action, on each of your turns whilst before the spell ends, you can change the direction which the line blasts from you. So useful as a bonus action that you can change the direction of the wind. But I think that's an ability that you're probably going to use. It says concentration for up to a minute, but it's unlikely, unless you're backing away whilst casting the spell, that you're going to be holding on to it for the full minute. However, it's in terms of cost or economies of key points, which is all important to an elemental monk because you've got a lot to balance. A lot of ways to spend your key points and not a lot of ways to save. It's worth noting that, as a concentration spell, you're going to cast it once and then you can potentially use it for the entirety of an encounter without spending any more key points. So it could serve a use to you over a longer period of time. That being said, if you're looking to wait out and stand firm, then Rush of the Gale Spirits or Gust of Wind will help you hold the line for a moment. However, eventually those creatures are going to catch up to you, notably because pushing them 15 feet away and then them being able to move at a slower rate means that they can effectively close up that gap that you've just pushed them away on their turn. If they then fail again, they get pushed away again and they kind of get stuck in that cycle. It will be basically how it goes, unless they choose to dash. And if they dash, then that completely negates your 15 feet pushing back, because they'll be able to move 15 feet and then an extra 15 feet. So you have to be quite selective and pick your moments. But I think with the correct application and with some fortune on your side, Gust of Wind could be really useful for your monk. Think about having an elemental monk running around the battlefield, just pushing different enemies, dispersing them around the field away from, say, the squishy spellcaster and pushing them into the way of the hulking barbarian. Could be some uses there, and with your mobility as a monk, perhaps you're going to get more bang for your buck than other classes would with that spell. Then you have Shape the Flowing River. Again, this is another elemental specific discipline. As an action, you can spend 1 key point to choose an area of ice or water no larger than 30 feet on a side within 120 feet of you. You can change water to ice within the area and vice versa, and you can reshape ice in the area in any manner you choose. You can raise or lower the ice's elevation, create or fill in a trench, erect or flatten a wall, or form a pillar. The extent of any such changes can't exceed half the area's largest dimension. So that's at most... any changes can't exceed half the area's largest dimension, so it's going to be no larger than 15 feet. For example, if you affect a 30-foot square, you can create a pillar up to 15 feet high, raise or lower the square's elevation by up to 15 feet, dig a trench up to 15 feet deep, and so on. You can't shape the ice to trap or damage a creature in the area. So that last line is a real caveat that before you get into all kinds of icicle, nightmarish death machines, it's a very important distinction there that you can't use it to injure or trap a creature. So damage or trap a creature, should I say. So I would say out of all of the disciplines you get to choose from at 3rd level, that Shape the Flowing River is not only the cheapest, 1 key point, but equally it offers you a lot of utility. There's going to be some situations in combat where it's going to be useful. I would say you might want to use a bit more imagination with that. It's obviously not to do with damage, but it's going to be more to do with hindering opposition and things like that. So when I say being creative about it, it's really to get around the not damaging a creature and not trapping a creature rules. That being said, you could use it to slow down an enemy. You could, for instance, create a sheet of ice 30 feet wide, which would then perhaps cause them to slip over, up to the DM's discretion, but that seems pretty straightforward to me. If you've got sheet ice and your opponents are walking across it, they're going to have to make some kind of dexterity saving throw, like with the grease spell, for instance, to try and stop themselves from falling over. That would make sense to me. Equally, if your DM isn't going to allow that, another application you could use in combat is to just erect an ice wall to protect your allies, or perhaps just to kind of divert your enemies. So instead of trapping them, it just means that they have to take an alternative route to get where they're going, slowing them down, hindering them, and perhaps perhaps you can make even a funnel with 2 applications, make 2 15-foot walls, which then kind of funnel your opponents towards your tank in the middle, for instance. So those are just some combat uses. But of course, it's not all about combat, and this elemental discipline can be really useful for roleplay and in exploration as well. Imagine you find a 30 feet river, 30 feet wide river that you need to cross, and for instance, it could be it's an extremely strong current. There could be various horrible monsters lurking underneath the water, and you want to avoid all that. You could simply simply turn a 30-foot section of that river to ice, but into maybe rather than sheet ice, turning it into a more rough a kind of rough feeling ice that would give you a bit more grip. But even if you don't get a lot of grip and you're going to slip over, as the DM says, still being able to turn that to ice and then being able to traverse over the river is going to save you guys a job. It's going to save you a real job. It's going to revolutionize your exploration in that sense. You could also make a very small boat out of ice, which may last for some time. It depends on whether you rule it as magical ice or just normal ice, in which case it's going to melt after a little while. But still, for a little while, you're going to be in this really cool ice boat. So again, another good application of that. And in roleplay, we actually came across this in Tales from the Sword Coast with a boy who had been hit by an ice dragon's fire, and it looked like he was going to die. The ice was in his veins, and it looks like it was making its way towards his heart. However, with the elemental monk novice could then turn up and use Shape the Flowing River to turn all of the ice within the boy's body to water, as it also notes that it's not just turning water to ice, you can turn ice to water and so on. So there's going to be various uses for it. Perhaps you can even see, you might be in the middle of winter fighting against an enemy and realize that you're standing on essentially what was a frozen lake. You could then turn the section that your enemies are standing on back into water, which doesn't injure or trap them. Notably, they can easily get out of the water. They could climb back out onto the ice, but it does hinder them. It doesn't damage them if they drop into the water, but perhaps if they sink, they might start drowning, in which case that would injure them, perhaps kill them, but you're not damaging them by doing that. So there are various applications for Shape the Flowing River, and as I said, at 3rd level, it is probably the most economically friendly option for you to take. Also at 3rd level, you can choose Sweeping Cinder Strike. You can spend 2 key points to cast Burning Hands. So just like Fist of Four Thunders, where you can cast Thunder Wave, this one, you're casting a spell, and it's an area of effect spell. Burning Hands does an equivalent amount of damage to Thunder Wave, but doesn't have the control effect of being able to push away opponents like Thunder Wave does. But you can cause some good fire damage with that, but it is at a cost of 2 key points, and as I said, at 3rd level that leaves you with 1 key point until you short rest, so it might not be worth you doing. Finally, at 3rd level you can also choose Water Whip. You can spend 2 key points as an action to create a whip of water that shoves and pulls a creature to unbalance it. A creature that you can see that is within 30 feet of you must make a dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 3d10 bludgeoning damage plus an extra 1d10 bludgeoning damage for each additional key point you spend, and you can either knock it prone or pull it up to 25 feet closer to you. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage, and you don't pull it or knock it prone. So in some ways it's comparable to Fist of Unbroken Air, because you've got that control effect and it does the same damage, just in water form rather than air form. Notably, though, you have the choice here, either knocking it prone or pulling it up to 25 feet closer to you. You don't get both. Unlike Fist of Unbroken Air, where you push them away and it knocks them prone. So there's one less thing in that regard. But equally, that gives you some choice, it gives you some versatility, and there's a number of ways that you will be able to use that, and not necessarily using it against your enemies. For instance, there may be a situation where it looks like a member of your party is about to fall off a sheer rock face down a cliff, for instance. Maybe the ground gave way about them and they're teetering on the edge. If you can react in time to use Water Whip, you could then pull them closer to you. And yes, you damage them, but hey, it saved their life. So in that sense, that could be useful. Equally so, you can pull enemies up to 25 feet closer to you, which I would say for the most part, you're probably not going to want to do, because you're more of a hit and run character, and therefore, at least traditionally speaking with a monk build, you're more inclined to hit them and then get out. Pulling a creature closer to you is not going to help you in that regard, but being able to knock them prone most certainly will. Knocking them on their arse means you can then get advantage on your attacks against them, or your allies will get advantage on attacks against them. And it also means that if you do knock it prone, you can then move, and it's in melee with you, you can then move out of their reach, and they'll have disadvantage on their opportunity attacks. So it could give you a way out without spending additional key points, for instance, with a minimized risk of taking damage. So another thing to bear in mind, and especially if you're going to go for a more sort of water-themed elemental monk, Water Whip is definitely a good call for you. So that's all of the 3rd level disciplines. You then don't get to choose another discipline or change them until 6th level. Now, I think I'll talk more about this in the criticism part, but that is fairly limiting. It means that your choices are very important, and then you're stuck with them for 3 more levels before you can change anything, which, if you've chosen the wrong ones, means you're going to be feeling really, really annoyed and bad. That's rules as written. I would encourage DMs to allow their Elemental Monk players, you know, if it's their first time playing them, for instance, to, if they've chosen something and they just don't think it's for them, let them change it when they level. Let them change it at 4th or 5th, possibly both, if that's what you want to do. I just think that's a bit fairer, and equally means they'll still enjoy the game and be able to try out something else. But I'll get more onto that overall in the class, talking about disciplines. About criticism and improvements. So at 6th level, you can choose between 2 more options. So you could choose one of the ones from 3rd level that we've already gone through, or you have 2 more options available to you. Yes, a whole 2. Firstly, and I completely missed it, Clench of the North Wind. You can spend 3 key points to cast Hold Person. Now at 5th level, as a monk, you get Stunning Strike, which is so... I mean, it's been said so many times on other videos and forums that it's so overpowered, it's ridiculous. Perhaps not necessarily, but it is still a really powerful ability. Just to go over then, Stunning Strike. Starting at 5th level, you can interfere with the flow of ki in an opponent's body. When you hit another creature with a melee weapon attack, you can spend 1 ki point to attempt a Stunning Strike. The target must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or be stunned until the end of your next turn. So this is where conditions come in, and how they are relevant and important, and how they can influence the battlefield. Being able to stun your enemies with Stunning Strike is really good, and in fact it is comparable, or comparable should I say, to using Hold Person, which I believe paralyzes your opponent rather than stuns them. So taking a look here at conditions, a stunned creature is incapacitated, another condition, can't move, and can speak only falteringly. The creature automatically fails strength and dexterity saving throws, and attack rolls against the creature have advantage. Then paralyzed. A paralyzed creature is incapacitated and can't move or speak. The creature automatically fails strength and dexterity saving throws, the same. Attack rolls against the creature have advantage. Any attack that hits the creature is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of the creature. So, in a nutshell, stunned and paralyzed are exactly the same. However, paralyzed gives you one more very important additional benefit, and that is that any creature that hits the creature is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of the creature. So casting Hold Person, again, is going to be really helpful for your team. It's going to be helpful for you on your next turn if you are able to hold your concentration and your opponent has not managed to pass their wisdom save to break out of the Hold Person spell. So, but equally, you don't need to be in melee range with them. To use Stunning Strike, you have to be up in melee to hit them. With Clench of the North Wind and Hold Person, you can be 30, 60 feet, something like that. You can be at range, which is an incredibly useful for your character. But not only that, but it means that once you cast the spell and it works, the rest of your team then can have advantage, can then cause critical hits to the creature, provided they hit it with a melee weapon attack in melee range. So it's if you're looking at being a team player, Clench of the North Wind could be a really good option for you, provided none of your spellcasters already have that spell. Go for it. Gong of the Summit. You can spend 3 key points to cast Shatter. Now, Shatter is one of those spells that I overlooked when I first played D&D and kind of thought, oh, that's okay, I guess. And I've since found more and more players using Shatter and going, that's really, really useful, especially against buildings and constructs. That stuff is really good with the thunder damage. So again, it gives you a ranged option. The Elemental Monk gives you so much in terms of ranged options that I think actually it's a really good choice for a monk player who's looking to be more sort of at the back, moving around and trying out hindering enemies and harassing them with spells. I think that's a really good class for that. And I think using Shatter with Gong of the Summit is a really good example of that. So at 6th level, 3 key points means that you can cast that potentially twice per short rest if you're not using your key points for anything else. But also, even if you are going to use other things, one use of Gong of the Summit it gives you 3 key points left over for other things. So it's not too expensive at this point. So as you can see already, at 6th level, we've already got 7 or 8 options of spells to choose from. And it's at this point that you'll probably start to feel quite limited on your selection because you can only choose 3 of them out of the 7 or 8 you have to choose from. And I think that is an issue with the class, but we'll get more onto that later on in this video. For now, let's jump in with what you can get at 11th level. First of all, Flames of the Phoenix. Yes, it's that iconic one. You can spend 4 key points to cast Fireball. So, a quintessential D&D spell, Fireball. A monk that can cast Fireball, pretty darn useful. Particularly if it's partnered up with another one, which we'll get onto in a moment. But Fireball, obviously, dexterity saving throw in a massive area of effect. It's a lot of damage. And it's going to be even more when you go up to higher levels and you can spend more points on it. It's a really good damaging spell, and particularly if none of your other spellcasters have it, this is a good one for you. That being said, you might get a little put off by the fact that some of your characters in your party, your spellcasters, will have been able to cast Fireball from level 5, and you have to wait till level 11. But it's better late than never, right? Next up, Mist Stance. This one often overlooked. You can spend 4 key points to cast Gaseous Form, targeting yourself. So Gaseous Form is one of those spells that, again, on the face of it, looks not very useful. Like, you can turn yourself to gas, you can't talk to people, you can move very slowly, and attacks, you'll have resistance, I think, to attacks against you. But you'll still take damage. So it's like, well, why would I do that? However, it's uniquely useful for a monk to have Gaseous Form used on them for one very important thing, and that is because of your extra movement you get as a monk. Just been looking into this, and so in the spell description for Gaseous Form, you transform a willing creature you touch, in this case you, along with everything it's wearing and carrying, into a misty cloud for the duration. The spell ends if the creature drops to 0 hit points. An incorporeal creature isn't affected. While in this form, the target's only method of movement is a flying speed of 10 feet. The target can enter and occupy the space of another creature. The target has resistance to non-magical damage, so not even magical damage you get resistance to. And it has advantage on strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throws. The target can pass through small holes, narrow openings, and even mere cracks, though it treats liquids as though they were solid surfaces. The target can't fall and remains hovering in the air even when stunned or otherwise incapacitated. While in the form of a misty cloud, the target can't talk or manipulate objects, and any objects it was carrying or holding can't be dropped, used, or otherwise interacted with. The target can't attack or cast spells. So it's more of a get-out-of-jail-free card that you can escape with that spell, or you can use it to get into areas that otherwise you wouldn't be able to reach. Obviously, you can float into small cracks. You could find perhaps a cracks in some rocks leading into a larger cavern, which other members of your group may not be able to access. So it's useful in that respect, but uniquely as a monk, that 10 feet won't apply to you, not necessarily, because in addition to that 10 feet of movement, as a monk, you get your unarmored movement. Your speed increases by 10 feet while you are not wearing armor or wielding a shield. That's at 2nd level. At 11th level, your movement speed is plus 20 feet, meaning that in Gaseous Form, you can move 30 feet, which is your normal movement speed for any other class, with some exceptions. So you can move at a relatively normal speed in Gaseous Form. So uniquely for the monk, it's a really handy spell to have up your sleeve. And then final option, possibly the coolest of all if you're really looking to go Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon on your ass, Ride the Wind. You can spend 4 key points to cast Fly, targeting yourself. Yep, you're a monk that can fly. I don't really know how else to put this other than it's amazing that you can then fly. It makes you even more mobile than any other monk subclass. So definitely a consideration. I'd say level 11 you get some very cool options, and choosing between them is going to be pretty difficult unless you have a very clear idea of what you want to do with your monk. Just having a brief look at the description of the spell. The target gains a flying speed of 60 feet for the duration. When the spell ends, the target fails if it is still aloft, unless it can stop the fall. Now, as a monk, again, just like with Gaseous Form, at 11th level, you have a plus 20 feet movement speed, meaning that your flying speed, I think, also will increase from 60 feet to 80 feet. So not only can you can fly faster than any other class. So, again, a great option for your elemental monk. And then finally, your final choices for elemental disciplines come at 17th level. At this point, you have pretty much a world-beating monk, and you can top it off with some of the abilities. First of all, Breath of Winter. You can spend 6 key points to cast Cone of Cold. Now, you can't upgrade this spell beyond these 6 key points, beyond it being a 5th level spell. Still, a butt ton of damage in a very large area. Cone of Cold could be really useful, especially for your winter-themed elemental monk. Eternal Mountain Defense. Is a real shame that this comes in at 17th level rather than earlier on as it did in an earlier iteration of the player's handbook. You can spend 5 key points to cast Stone Skin, targeting yourself. Stone Skin, for those who don't know, is essentially like giving you resistance. One of the things that's really irritating about this is that is a first level barbarian feature. But, you know, for spellcasters in particular, Stone Skin is going to be useful because being resistant to damage is a good thing. But with a monk, Stone Skin, it's a concentration spell up to an hour. This spell turns the flesh of a willing creature you touch as hard as stone. Until the spell ends, the target has resistance to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. Now, now, as I said, you can only target yourself, which means that you're essentially raging, but for yourself. But it's not even quite as good as a rage would be for a barbarian because it's only resistant to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And at 17th level, it's unlikely you're going to be facing many foes that don't have magical capabilities with their attacks. Okay, you might do, and in which case this will be very useful to you. And nonetheless, I think being in the middle of a fray, which may happen from time to time, especially as a monk that's going to be wanting to do more melee combat encounters, actually having that in your toolbox is going to be really useful to then weather those hits. But again, as I said, it's a concentration spell, meaning that each time you take damage, you're going to have to make a concentration check to hold on to the Stone Skin. So again, that kind of goes against your use of the spell. And one other plus point of Stone Skin, casting it as an elemental monk, is that as an elemental monk, you get to cast spells without using the material components. And notably, Stone Skin needs diamond dust worth 100 GP, which the spell consumes. You don't need to do that, so it doesn't cost you anything, which I guess is a nice trade-off for the fact that it perhaps isn't as useful as you would hope it to be, seeing as it's meant to be protecting you from damage, yet you will also be the one having to make the concentration checks when you do get hit. So it's a fine balance with that spell. I almost talked myself out of Stone Skin there, didn't I? So, yeah. Anyway, next, River of Hungry Flame. Now, in James's superhero one-shot, which is here on the YouTube channel under one-shots, go check it out, plug. Wall of Fire was used to devastating effect. It covers a very large area, and it gives you a bit more of a battlefield control than Fireball would. Fireball, you literally just bombing an area, whereas Wall of Fire, you can maybe use it to encourage people in a certain direction by having the Wall of Fire still up. It can maybe dissuade people from crossing through the fire and maybe shepherd them in a different direction. You get that bit of control through there. Not only that, but you're also doing a lot of damage. And finally, Wave of Rolling Earth. You can spend 6 key points to cast Wall of Stone. So in terms of battlefield control and creating physical objects, Wall of Stone is going to take some beating. You'll be able to erect, a wall of stone or pillars of stone. You can shape the battlefield as you desire it and hinder your foes or perhaps make things easier for yourself and your party. Yes, it's expensive, but it could well serve some utility use as well as in combat. So those are all the elemental disciplines. And let's face it, there are some really cool ones in there. As you level, there's going to be some really, really useful spells that are really going to make your elemental monk feel like this bastion of elemental energy and really kind of capture the feeling of being the avatar from the series. So those are all the disciplines for you, every single one. Wow, that's quite a few. And as you can see, there's a lot there, and you only at maximum at 17th level get to choose 5 of them, which does suck. I'll admit that's not great. And particularly as you can only change them out each time you gain a new one, means that potentially with changing them out, doing some quick maths, you only get to experience at most 8 of those disciplines. Which is roughly about half of them, which is a real shame that you don't get to try out more of them. And in which case, this is why I would suggest using the elemental disciplines specific to the Way of the Four Elements monk, because you won't get to try them with any other class or subclass within the game. The main criticism that's lobbied at the class is its economy, the use of key points, and there's been a lot of there's quite a well-known fix online for the subclass, which says to basically knock off a key point for each of the spells or each of the elemental disciplines. Use 1 less key point, and somehow that will rectify the problem. But I don't think that fixes anything. I think fixes is probably not the best term anyway, because I don't think the class is broken. In fact, the more that I look at this, the more actually I think it's well suited. There are things that I would change if I had it my way, but for the most part, I think that actually it's pretty well balanced with the other classes, and I'll tell you why. Yes, it does use your key points along with all of your other monk abilities, meaning it can be quite expensive. That's true. But remember that you get all of your key points back on a short rest. Not some, like with Arcane Recovery with your spellcasters, but all. Just like if you look at the Elemental Monk as essentially a half-casting version of a Warlock gets 2 spell slots along with Mystic Arcanum at higher levels, and gets all of them back on a short rest, meaning that it can cast 2 spells and then short rest, and then it can cast 2 more spells. The monk is exactly the same. You can cast, you can use your elemental disciplines with key points, or cast your elemental spells with key points, and then you can get them. You can replenish all of your key points during a short rest. So it means that you effectively can do something very unique, which none of the other classes I think can do. Well, perhaps not as regularly anyway. It means you can regularly cast Fireball. Right? At level 12, you can cast Fireball. If you wanted to do this, I'm not saying you should, but at level 12, you could cast Fireball three times per short rest. Just that one spell, 3 times. And then short rest, and then cast it 3 more times. You can nuke the battlefield 3 times with Fireball, then take a rest, and then do it all over again. That's pretty insane if you're in a campaign where you have a lot of fights and get a lot of short rests. You really are going to make the most of those short rests. I think it's a fair criticism that you're then having to choose between doing the spells and doing your other monk features. However, I would also add to that yes, you get them back on a short rest, but equally your elemental disciplines should not be something that you can just do all the time, at least not the most powerful ones. You shouldn't be able to do it at will whenever you want. I mean, that has all of the makings of a really good antagonist, but for a player character, channeling your ki to such an extent that you can then harness the power of nature itself should be a lot of effort. It should be a lot of resource to do it. And it's offset by the fact that you get all of those resources back when you short rest. So for me, actually, it's quite a good balance for this character. And let's face it, when you run out of key points, you're still going to be a good martial combatant with your martial arts and with your monk weapons. So it's not like you're going to have no tricks left up your sleeve when your key points have been depleted. But being able to cast the spell you need right at that critical moment is where this class is going to shine. And I think one of the reasons also why it gets a lot of criticism is much of the reason why a lot of these subclasses get criticism, and that's because they're a bit more of a long game class. You don't feel the benefits of your 4 elements monk so much at 3rd level as you would do, say, at 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th level. Simply because the cost is a lot at low levels, and equally the effects aren't as powerful. Just like being a spellcaster, that you really come online in the latter half of the game, because the spellcasters start overtaking the martial classes by some distance later on in the game. It just so happens that most D&D campaigns happen at lower levels. Unfortunately, that's just how it is, and so that wasn't foreseen when the 5th edition was released. So I think that one of the reasons players get frustrated is that they feel they can't do enough with the 4 elements monk at 3rd level, and therefore they kind of bin it before getting further on down the line. Whereas if maybe they came in at 10th level trying out a 4 elements monk, or 11th level to get that extra discipline, they probably would have a much better time of it, I think, in my opinion. There is one other fix, probably the most famous of all actually, that's out online, which gives you a lot of extra options. It harnesses some of these spells from the Elemental Evil Player's Companion, as well as making some other modifications to effectively boost up the 4 elements monk. Now, the spells that they've included, fantastic, and I think it's a real shame that Wizards of the Coast didn't update the elemental disciplines that the monk can use. when they released Xanathar's Guide, because in that they released all of the elemental evil player's companion spells in that book as well. That would have been, and they also provided all of these different subclasses. I think that would have been a great book to then put in these extra elemental disciplines. But I think because the class isn't played that much, they maybe just kind of pushed it to one side and forgot about it. But I think that's a real trick missed. So although I can't remember the name of it, that fix is worth looking into to look at those elemental spells. You've got things like Absorb Elements, which just seems on the money. That's what an elemental monk should have. If you decide to use one of your ASIs to not boost your ability scores, but instead to take a feat, and you're playing an elemental monk, a strong consideration would be to take Magic Initiate to get yourself a couple of elemental cantrips from the Druid class, I would suggest, because also it harnesses your wisdom in the same way as your elemental spells do anyway. So it's a really nice synergy there by taking the Druid Magic Initiate, but also you get one use per long rest first level spell, and for that something like Absorb Elements fits really well with the character. So that would be a strong consideration for me for that. But yeah, if you want to use that fix, the spells in there are great additions, but equally you're going to be paralyzed with choice because you're still limited to 5 spells. 5 disciplines. I keep doing that, I'm sorry. So I am kind of torn with it, that I think it's a really good class. I think it's well balanced with the game. There are small modifications that I personally would make to it in order to make it, tweak it just to make it a little bit better. And here is what they are. So firstly, what I would do is I would broaden the amount of disciplines you can learn. I think being able to change your change one of your disciplines as you level in the same way as other spellcasters will mean that if you choose poorly, he chose poorly from Indiana Jones, you wouldn't feel stung so much and kind of strapped to a useless discipline for 3 levels, because the next level you can drop it and change it out. I think that would, in one way that would definitely help, complemented by being able to learn twice as many disciplines. I don't think it upsets the balance of the game at all. If you have a few more tools to your locker, you're still going to be limited by the number of key points you have anyway. So it's not going to change the balance of the game if you are able to access a few more disciplines. If anything, it's going to broaden your versatility. It's going to make you a monk for all seasons. And the elemental monk, should be something like that, really, being able to harness all 4 elements. It's called Way of the 4 Elements, and the fact that you can only learn 5 by 17th level, 5 disciplines, means that you can only actually get all 4 elements by 11th level at the earliest, which I appreciate. It's part of the journey to command and establish a link to all 4 of the elements. You may want to play it that way. That's entirely up to you. But if you want to give yourself some more versatility, I would suggest doubling the amount of disciplines that you can learn. So as I said, you can swap a discipline every time you level, and when you gain an additional discipline, which I think happens at 6th, 11th, 17th, you gain, instead of 1, you gain 2. Or you can space it out however you think would fit with your game and balance well. But that would be one thing I would do to help out your monk and give you a bit more options. And finally, as I said earlier, I think incorporating the spells from the homebrew fix would also be really helpful because of all those elemental evil spells. I think it's such a shame that they weren't added to the Way of the 4 Elements monk. I appreciate pretty niche. That's one subclass in a myriad of subclasses in 5th edition, but they are on the money exactly what an elemental monk should have. They should have the elemental spells. Come on, guys. So I think for definite, they should be some of the options you can choose from. I'm very resistant to trying to make it more powerful because I don't think it's underpowered. I think that's a common misconception online. I think it's just it just could do with a bit more versatility, because I think out of all of the monk subclasses, the Way of the 4 Elements seems the most diverse and the most versatile because of the amount of spells you can access and the fact that you can choose and customize. You don't get that with any of the other monk subclasses. With the others, when you take a subclass, you get to this level, you get this. You get to this level, you get this. There's no choice involved. And so why not make the most of that choice and kind of celebrate that amount of choice by giving them a bit more choice and being able to swap out those spells as they level. I think just a little tweak like that would just make all the difference with this subclass. So just to clarify, I would be very hesitant to drop the amount of key point cost by 1, because that means that your 1 key point cost spells then cost 0, which seems a bit OP. And then equally, even if you didn't do that, it's then going to upset that balance. You're going to be able to cast a lot more, which, hey, is great for the elemental monk player, that they can cast more elemental disciplines, cast more elemental spells, they can do more elemental stuff. I appreciate that, but you've got to think of the balance of the game, and if you can, you're going to overtake and outshine the rest of your group if you're able to just cast these spells all the time. Obviously, it's your table, guys. It's entirely up to you. This is all just my opinion. And feel free to disagree in the comments if you have, or agree, and give your suggestions on how to improve the Way of the Four Elements class. But to summarize, I think it's a great subclass. I really think it's full of flavor. It's the most diverse and versatile of the monk subclasses. It's a monk that can cast spells. It's a freaking Jedi. It's the closest thing I've seen to a Jedi in 5th edition. Just think about it. Just having a short sword in one hand, wearing the monastic robes, also being able to use the Force to then kind of force push your enemies away with a Fist of Unbroken Air, or using Force Lightning, but Thunderwave styled as Force Lightning, for instance. Just little things like that, I think, would be a really powerful sort of Jedi Knight feel to it. And yes, I think people would also comment that Eldritch Knight would work for a Jedi Knight, but Eldritch Knights are going to wear armor, obviously, aren't they? And they're not going to be able to do the monk stuff, which monks do. They're not going to be able to make the extra unarmed strike and do the somersaults and the disengaging. The monk really has that the Jedi feel flavor-wise, but also in terms of its options and things that it can do on the battlefield. For me, the Way of the Four Elements is the ultimate kind of Jedi character. So if you're looking to stylize your character in that sense, choose this. And equally, as I said, Avatar: The Last Airbender, I've seen a lot of criticism in the form of memes, in the form of forums and videos, saying that, you choose the Way of the Four Elements because you want to be Avatar. And then in reality, you're nowhere near that. You just don't get to be that powerful. Yeah, I think it was definitely inspired by Avatar, but I'd also add that I don't think it's exactly the same as becoming the Way of the Four Elements. Is exactly the same as becoming the Avatar, and I don't think it should be. I think it is part of the journey of sort of learning to harness the four elements, but equally, it's a spellcasting monk, guys. What more do you want? You can do all of this martial prowess. You can be knocking down bad guys, stunning them, and then you can also be launching fireballs and flying. I mean, what more do you want? It's a great subclass, and I very much look forward to playing it again in Tales of the Sword Coast when that picks up. It will be going live here on YouTube, so make sure you're subscribed and following us here at Slice and Dice to make sure you don't miss that when that starts up again. Anyway, thank you so much. Those are my thoughts on the Way of the Four Elements, and I hope you all start playing the class yourselves soon. If you have played the class, if you're playing the class, if this has been useful to you, let me know in the comments. I look forward to seeing them. And until then, stay safe.
Dungeons and Motherfucking Dragons!
Fix